It sounded perfect, that aching saxophone, that velvet voice, that slow, guilty dance. But behind Careless Whisper was chaos, heartbreak, a bitter contract war, and a secret that George Michael buried inside a billion-dollar melody. He was only 17 when the tune came to him like a curse. And by the time the world heard it, he had already betrayed someone who never saw it coming. Some say the label tried to bury the song. Others claim George wanted to give it away, convinced he wasn't worthy of its beauty. And that legendary sax solo? Some believe it was a total accident, born out of studio desperation. But what's true, and what's just whispered? Let's go behind the hit. You're watching Behind the Hit, where music's biggest moments hide their darkest truths. Subscribe for the real stories behind the songs you thought you knew. Before George Michael, there was just Georgios, a chubby kid from the London suburbs, quiet, insecure, and convinced he'd never be the one the world noticed. But even then, something stirred inside him, a kind of rhythm that didn't match his body, but lived in his soul. He met Andrew Ridgeley at school, and suddenly the dream got louder. Together they formed The Executive, then Wham, and their chemistry was electric. George had the voice,
Just as long as we're together.
Andrew had the vision.
Why work so hard?
The rest was just waiting to catch fire. But long before the strobe lights and screaming fans came a moment George never forgot, a bus ride. He was 17, headed to work, when a melody floated into his mind. It wasn't gentle, it was piercing, like a memory he hadn't lived yet. That melody haunted him for months, and eventually it found a name. To understand Careless Whisper, you need to know Jane. George met her at a skating rink when he was 12. She was beautiful, confident, everything he wasn't. He watched her from afar, never said a word. But the crush? It never faded. Years later, he got a second chance. At 16, George had grown into his skin. He was in a band, dating a girl named Helen, and finding his voice. That's when Jane came back, and this time, she wanted him. He didn't break up with Helen. He just drifted into something new without letting go of the old. And when it all came crashing down, George didn't just carry the guilt, he turned it into art. Every lyric in Careless Whisper, I'm never gonna dance again.
I'm never gonna dance again.
Guilty feet have got no rhythm,
Guilty feet have got no rhythm.
was his confession. He later admitted it was based on something real, his own mistake, his own regret, not a fictional tragedy, a memory. But that wasn't the only thing haunting him. At the time, George and Andrew were locked in a contract with Intervision Records, a tiny label with big claws. They had signed fast, with stars in their eyes, and didn't see the fine print. Soon Wham was on top of the pops, but barely making money. They didn't own their music. They didn't control their releases. When George decided Careless Whisper would be his first solo single, something deeper than Wham's bubbly image, Intervision pushed back. Hard. They threatened to block the release, said the song belonged to them. A legal fight followed. George, still barely out of school, was suddenly battling for his future. And while that storm brewed, another was unfolding inside him. He didn't think he could do the song justice. He even considered handing it off, letting someone else sing the words he wrote in shame. Rumor has it, and it's never been confirmed, that he briefly floated the idea of giving it to David Cassidy, a throwback pop idol. It never happened. But just the thought says everything about George's self-doubt. He was writing brilliance and didn't know if he deserved it. Then came the dream, or rather, the nightmare disguised as a dream. George flew to Alabama to record the song with Jerry Wexler, the legendary producer who'd shaped icons like Aretha Franklin and Ray Charles. Muscle Shoals, sacred ground. But George wasn't ready. He later confessed he was so nervous he showed up drunk. The result? Flat, empty. Nothing like the sound in his head. He hated it. Epic Records wanted to release that version anyway, but George stood firm. So he made the most radical choice of his young career. He would do it himself. At just 21, he told the label he was scrapping the Wexler cut. He'd re-record Careless Whisper in London on his own terms with his own musicians. And then came the saxophone. It took 8 players to try and fail to capture the sound George wanted. It was a solo that didn't exist, except in his head. Then Steve Gregory walked in. Still, even he couldn't nail it. Until the engineer had a wild idea. What if they slowed down the tape, had Gregory record it lower, and sped it back up? Suddenly, it clicked. That smooth, slightly warped tone, that haunting bend in the notes, it wasn't by design. It was born from frustration, from failure, and from pure studio magic. And George knew it the moment he heard it. That's it, he said. That's the solo. In the UK, Careless Whisper dropped under George Michael's name only. The label wanted to frame it as his grown-up debut, a bridge out of Wham's teenage image. Everywhere else, it was still credited as Wham, featuring George Michael. Confusing, sure, but it didn't matter. The world listened and fell. It went number 1, won in over 20 countries, sold millions. It was undeniable. But George distanced himself. In interviews, he often called it overrated. He admitted it was the most painful song he ever wrote. Years later, he said, "People still love it, but I don't think they realize. It's not just a song, it's an apology." And yet fans clung to it. So did record labels, radio stations, even fellow legends. In 1985, at the Apollo Theater's 50th anniversary, Smokey Robinson joined George on stage to sing it.
Careless whisper. Oh, oh.
The crowd roared. George smiled, but deep down he hated being reminded of what and who the song was about. There's even been quiet speculation that George tried to keep Careless Whisper off some of his live tours, not because it wasn't a hit, but because it cut too deep. Careless Whisper wasn't just George Michael's first hit, it was his first scar, set to music. Every note of that saxophone solo, it echoed a mistake he couldn't undo. Every time the crowd sang it back to him, they were unknowingly holding up a mirror to his guilt. He said he never wanted to dance again. And maybe he meant it, because when your biggest song is also your deepest regret, you don't just perform it, you relive it again and again. And still, the world keeps dancing.